just start with the Samuel review, which was commissioned by Cbus about a decade ago. Is that an inquiry that you've had an opportunity to read?
Yes, it is, but I'm a relatively new chair. As you know, I joined the board at the beginning of 2022, but I'm aware that that report in particular advocated the appointment of independent directors to the board, of which I am now one, and so is Dr Edwards. So we took notice of that report and we acted on it. Dr Edwards might want to say something about that because he was, of course, on the board at that time.
Please.
Actually, I wasn't on the board at that time. I came 3 years later, but I am acquainted with the report, and as the chairman says, it recommended that we appoint more independent directors. At that point, we had one. I think we now have 2. And more importantly, I think the chair, under the Samuel's recommendation, the chair would be an independent. That is now the case.
I think, though, that Mr Samuel did say that in the case of Mr Swan, I think he did say that Mr Swan is a perfect example of a political operative. So then you've got to question the absolute independence of the chair. So did Mr Samuel recommend that there be an independence test when he recommended the adoption of independent directors?
The question to me?
Yes, Mr Swan.
Well, I don't think anyone would recommend that you would ban someone or forbid someone to be an independent director because they were a member of a political party. And I think one of the great things about the equal representation model is that we have people from employers, we have people from unions, and we have people from all political parties. I would have thought my appointment to the board as an independent director is very much in line with that thinking, and also, given my experience, I'm uniquely qualified to be an independent director of a fund such as this.
So, Mr Swan, how in fact did you get this role as chair of Cbus?
Well, I was approached, actually, I think in the first instance by the employers on the board. As you're aware, we have 6 master builders, we have 6 union representatives on the board, and we have 2 independent directors. And they were looking for a new chair. And in the first instance, I think I had discussions with the master builders, but I also had discussions with the unions.
Okay, and so just for clarity, so the Samuel review, did it recommend 1/3 of the board be independent?
No, I don't believe it was hard in its recommendation of 1/3 of the board being independent. And I think we've come up with a very good compromise.
Okay, so you now have a new governance review, which has been done by Deloitte, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, and was there a press release put out by the Cbus organisation on the 19th of November relating to the Deloitte report?
Yes, there was.
Okay, but that media release is no longer on the website. Is there a reason for that?
I'm unsure that it's not. I don't know why it's not on the website now, but it's a public document and I'm happy to talk about it because what it announced was that we had done our fit and proper processes for our directors and we had a deadline emerging, a 90-day deadline, where we had to reappoint new directors to the board. So there was some urgency to make those appointments and we did so correctly after performing fit and proper processes.
So who do you say signs off on the fitness and propriety of these directors? Is that a Cbus internal process or are you relying on Deloitte's advice?
Well, Deloitte conducted a fit and proper process and we conducted our own fit and proper processes and the directors that we appointed were appointed in line with those processes.
Okay, so we had the chair of APRA at the Senate committee last week and they haven't received the Deloitte report yet and they appear to be, Mr Lonsdale appear to be troubled by that. Is there any reason why they haven't been given the report?
I wouldn't talk for APRA, but APRA has the Deloitte report. They will deal with it within the time frames that they decide. But we had an urgency to move to announce our new directors as we had a deadline, I think, on the Friday to appoint new directors. So we did, knowing full well that they'd received the endorsement of those processes.
Okay. And did you sign off on this media release?
I did.
You did. And did you sign off on the amended media release, which
I did.
removed Deloitte's name? Okay.
I did, yeah.
So why was Deloitte removed from the release?
Because the report is in the hands of APRA, but have not made their final decision or announcement about receiving the report. That's simple.
Okay. So APRA expressed some unhappiness, did they?
Not directly to me, but I'm in continual conversation with APRA, and those conversations are ones that I hold with them in a confidential way. But I think you should ask APRA if you've got any further questions.
So my understanding then is the administrator of the CFMEU has now worked with you and your board to arrange for 3 new people to come onto the board. Is that right?
The administrator of the CFMEU took his decisions for appointments to the board on his own terms.
Okay, and are you saying now that the 3 new people, including Mr. Crumlin and Mr. Mara, have been signed off as fit and proper?
Yes, I am, absolutely.
Okay. So, I mean, in relation to Mr. Crumlin, he was the chair of the worst performing superannuation fund in the country, according to APRA's data. And I see you have said in your release that he has extensive experience oversighting contemporary investment. I'm just wondering, how does that comply with the fit and proper test, which requires directors to have competence, knowledge and skills?
Well, because Mr. Cromwell does have extensive experience in running super funds, and to characterise the experiences of the Maritime Fund as reflecting on his competence is not a fair thing to do. And if you look at the evaluations that we looked at, and I assume the evaluations that Deloitte went through, they've concluded that as well.
And so what are Mr. Mara's extensive governance skills? You say he has extensive governance skills.
Yes, he does. And he's at last year, I think he went on an education assignment, if you like, to the United States, and did additional study. He's upgraded his qualifications in finance. There's a very impressive list of achievements of Mr. O'Mara, and I'll be very happy to send them to you. But I don't have the full list in front of me.
Okay, but most of his governance skills have come from the CFMEU, is that right?
No, it's not necessarily the case. And I would differ with your definition of governance skills. He has a lot of real life experience in the construction industry, and he has real life experience in administration, and he has academic qualifications and certifications. It's quite an impressive list.
Okay. Can I ask Mr. Edwards, how did you become chair of the risk committee?
I was invited to become chair by the board. At the time, previous chair, David Noonan, resigned from the fund.
Okay, and what are your risk management skills?
Well, risk management skills are those that you acquire on the board of Cbus over the previous 4 or 5 years, and that I had acquired in other board roles prior to that.
Okay. But do you have any specific experience in risk management?
Prior to that, prior to those experiences, no.
Okay. Can I ask you about the payment of directors, Mr. Swan? How much are the directors typically paid on Cbus's board?
Well, I think it would depend on what committee some of them sat on, so there would be differences in payment between members, but I'm happy to send you the full list of payments to members. I'm not going to take a stab in the dark because some committee members receive additional payments. For example, the chair of the investment committee would receive an additional payment.
Okay, but you must have a general understanding or general sense of what the payment would be.
Well, I can tell you what my payments are, and some would be, of the order of 80,000 or so as a base payment.
Okay, that's the total payment you receive.
No, it's not the total payment because some people will be topped up by committees.
Okay, what's the total you receive then?
I receive as chair of the board $210,000. All the figures, of course, are in the annual report. You care to have a look.
And I'm interested in whether these funds flow through to the sponsoring unions. Do they flow through, or do the individuals keep the money?
No, some union directors have their funds paid directly to the union. Some receive them personally.
Okay. If you could take on notice who does what, that'd be very helpful.
I'm happy to provide that.
Thank you.
In fact, yeah, I'm happy to provide that, but I'm also happy for you to have a look at the annual report.
Thanks, Mr. Swan. I just want to return to this question of the chair of the risk committee, Mr. Swan. So, Dr. Edwards said he didn't have any risk management experience before being on the Cbus board. So, does that trouble you that someone with no relevant experience could be chairing the risk committee of a massive super fund?
I completely and utterly reject that characterisation of Dr. Edwards. Dr. Edwards is a great Australian who has extensive experience across the board in both the private sector and in the public sector. He spent years as a chief economist to a large commercial firm that I will not name, where he gained a large amount of private sector experience. He is a world-renowned economist who was well-read and also well-practiced in discussions of the economy and in wider areas. To suggest that he is not capable or should not be able to be the chair of a risk committee in an insurance fund is preposterous.
Well, thank you, Mr. Swan. The super fund that you're chairing has been accused of not being able to pay its insurance claims, so that is a pretty material risk, I would have thought. Do you have a risk and control matrix?
As you are well aware, these are matters which will be the subject of legal action, and as they will be the subject of legal action, I'm not going to say anything today that would prejudice the outcome of that legal action, but I will say a few things about insurance. First of all, I want to apologise to all of those who've been affected in our fund, and that we, as a board, when we first became aware of the magnitude of this problem, set out to rectify this problem. And something like 80% of the unresolved cases have now been dealt with. But we are also engaged in a very substantial uplift in our fund across the whole area of risk management, if you like. And part of the restructuring of the executive in our fund in recent times has been a new chief risk officer. So we have frameworks in place, comprehensive frameworks, and we are working with the regulators to ensure that they are the best possible frameworks.
Okay. It's a large fund. I understand things can go wrong. That's why we have frameworks in place in the law and operationally to protect the members' interests. So I assume you have a risk and control.
Of course we do. Of course we do. But
okay.
let me just make this one point. We are not the only fund that has a challenge with a third-party provider and has delays in the processing of insurance claims. So this is also an issue elsewhere in the industry. But in saying that, we accept complete accountability for the outcomes. And that's why we have worked very hard with both the regulators and our fund to uplift our practices in this area, and that's what we're doing right now.
Okay. So on your risk register, is one of the risks the non-payment of insurance claims?
The non-payment of insurance claims. Of course it's a risk, but do I have the risk register in front of me? No, of course I don't.
Well,
I'm not going to answer I can't answer that question.
Okay. Well, so what's the main control? Maybe I should ask Dr. Edwards then. So what's the control in the risk register against the non-payment of insurance claims?
Well, payment of insurance claims is an important element in our risk control framework. But beyond saying that, Senator, as you're aware, ASIC has commenced an action against us in the federal court that relates to insurance claims. And in my view, and I'm advised, that to traverse these issues in this context risks introducing elements which are sub judice and which to which we should not respond.
That's okay, Dr. Edwards. So, Mr. Swan, you have been discussing these matters on the Today Show, and you said the cause of this principally lay with a third-party operator. Now, I just want to read out into the record the superprudential standard requirement here. The board cannot abrogate its responsibility for functions delegated to management. So, I mean, ultimately, you are responsible for the operation of the fund. So,
I have said publicly.
My question is, Mr. Swan, you can't blame Link, really, can you, under the law?
We accept complete accountability for these outcomes, but neither can you ignore the condition of the third-party operator. But as Dr. Edwards said, and I said before, these are matters that could be the subject of legal action, and to comment any further could prejudice that outcome.
But do you think it's a good look for you as the chair to be blaming Link?
I think there is a challenge with Link. It's a subject of public discussion, and it's a subject of public discussion, not just for Cbus, but for a number of other funds. Beyond that, I can't make any comment.
Well, I again remind you of your legal obligation. You cannot abrogate responsibility, so you cannot blame third parties.
I'm not abrogating responsibility. We accept complete responsibility, complete accountability. I've said that on numerous occasions publicly.
Okay. Well, can you provide your risk register on notice?
I'll take that on notice.
Okay. I want to ask you about the financials. So how much does the super fund Cbus pay to the CFMEU?
Well, we have partnership agreements with the CFMEU. I don't have the total figure in front of me, Senator, but they are partnership agreements which are subject to the BFID test because they are highly commercial arrangements which deliver great benefit to the fund in the same way that we have partnership arrangements with the master builders, with the CFMEU, with the AWU and other organisations. So partnership agreements exist across the industry between sponsoring organisations and the fund, and a number of funds. They're not exclusive to Cbus either, as you're well aware. And we get very good value from them, and that good value is measured, and we're accountable for measuring that.
So, according to your statements, it says you gave over $1 million to the CFMEU last year and $2.2 million to unions overall. Will you continue to pay money to the CFMEU now it's been put into administration by the Parliament?
Well, all our partnership agreements at the moment with the CFMEU are suspended, subject to the independent inquiries that are going on at the moment. But they continue with other organisations because they're very good value for the fund.
Does the board approve these payments?
Of course.
So the board approves each individual payment to each union? No,
the board doesn't. The board doesn't approve each individual payment. They go through processes and through a key committee of the board.
Okay.
And in the review that we're going through at the moment, we're looking at all of those arrangements for the future.
Okay, so you are turning off the tap to the CFMEU while it's in administration?
We've suspended payments to the CFMEU. That's what I said to you before.
Okay. Can I ask you about some historical payments you may have made to the CFMEU? Do you engage them for advisory services?
I don't have the list of partnership agreements in front of me, Senator, so I can't give you a complete answer on that.
Okay. Well, why don't you explain to me what services you receive as a super fund from the CFMEU?
Okay. Well, through a number of our agreements, we work with them to identify unpaid super. We last year have identified well over 100 million in unpaid super, and we've worked and identified that working with unions, not just the CFMEU, but other unions as well. Education about retirement, toolbox meetings, materials, all those things which help us retain membership, but also to recruit new membership. All of those, as I said to you before, all of those arrangements are subject to BFID assessment, and that's what's being reviewed at the moment.
Okay, and what about do you have members of the CFMEU or do you have CFMEU officials on the books at Cbus?
What do you mean CFMEU officials on the books?
Well, I mean, do you have people who are working for the CFMEU also being paid by Cbus?
Well, we have directors on the board who work for the administrator. We have one director, but I'm not sure what that question is aimed at.
Well, I'm wondering whether there are people who are CFMEU members who are paid by the super fund.
Well, we will pay people who work for our fund. We only pay people who work for our fund. We only pay employees, so I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well,
you can tell me what you really mean.
I'm wondering whether there are any uncommercial arrangements here.
Of course, we don't enter into uncommercial arrangements.
Okay, so there's no family members or there's no other particular special deals done for any CFMEU members at Cbus?
Well, not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge. I might get you to take that on notice.
I'm happy to take any question on notice, Senator.
And what about research? What about research? Have you asked the CFMEU for research?
Well, if you had a look at our partnership agreements, there may be part of that they supply material to us about where we can recruit membership. If you call that research, then it's research.
Okay. Mr. Swan, I want to come back to this issue of the financing of the union movement and then how that sits against the apparent non-payment of insurance claims and also the prospect of fines. So,
Senator, we don't finance the union movement.
Well, in the last year, you've given $2.3 million to the unions.
Well,
according to your own statements.
We haven't given money to anybody. We've entered into partnership agreements where services are provided which enhance the membership of the fund and enhance our member returns. We've entered into those agreements with employer organisations for the same reason. Those agreements are audited and supervised and are made under a framework of the BFID. They are subject to review in a number of the inquiries at the moment.
Yeah.
I believe that it will be demonstrated that they are successful programs which deliver good value for the fund rather than spending that amount of money in other areas such as advertising. What we are getting here is very good bang for our buck, which if it were a retail fund, they would be spending on advertising and other forms of promotion.
Mr. Swan, they are still payments, aren't they?
Of course they're payments. They are payments for services rendered.
Yeah, so
they're not payments to individuals. They are agreements and highly commercial.
Sure. So $2.3 million or thereabouts last year to unions, and you're now having a debate about whether you can pay insurance claims. So what I want to ask you about, though, is...
Senator.
You have changed your trust deed, haven't you? So you can charge your members to build up a reserve to pay regulatory fines, have you not?
Senator, we pay out 97% of insurance claims. I was sick in the guts when I heard that we had this accumulated list of people whose claims had been delayed.
Yeah.
Our fund has put enormous energy into rectifying this as far as we possibly can.
I understand that.
We will continue to do that.
So my question is about the trust deed changes. So Cbus did change its trust deed so it could charge members for future fines, hasn't it?
No, it hasn't done anything of the sort. We have reserves in our fund. That is prudent, any fund. We are a profit to member fund. We don't have shareholder.
How big are the reserves at the moment? What are the reserves at the moment?
I'm not about to go through the finances of Cbus here. If you want to ask me a question on notice, you can, and we'll deal with it in the appropriate way.
You don't know how much.
And you can also go to our annual report. But I'm not running through the balance sheet of Cbus today. and I'm happy to take any question on the balance sheet on notice.
Okay, so you can give a guarantee that the members of the fund will not pay any future regulatory fines?
I can't speculate and won't speculate about the possibility of fines.
Well, will the CFMEU help pay the fines?
We are a profit-to-member fund, Senator, a profit-to-member fund. It's entirely different from a commercial arrangement.
Okay. So my question then is, will the shareholder entities, the unions, the employer groups, whoever owns the share capital in the United Super organisation, will they put their hand in their pocket and pay future fines? If
there are no profits from a profit-to-member fund.
That's not my question.
This is my answer, Senator. There are no profits from our fund that go to any of our stakeholders.
You gave
we're a profit-to-member fund.
You gave $2.3 million to CFMEU last year. That's a large amount of money.
We didn't give them any money, Senator.
You paid it to them.
No, we had a commercial arrangement with unions, including the CFMEU, and we had and we have commercial arrangements with employers. We're not handing them money, Senator, and it's wrong of you to mischaracterise partnership agreements, which are commercial, as being a grant to a particular organisation. That's just not the case.
It sounds like the shareholders won't pay the fines, but the members will.
The shareholders don't receive financial benefits
from the organisation.
They do. No, they don't.
They did $2.3 million to unions last year.
No, well, that's your characterisation, Senator. They are commercial arrangements with services provided.
Okay. Well, look, let's move on. I want to ask you about this $500 million that you publicly committed to the Housing Australia Future Fund project. The CEO of Cbus, Mr. Fox, said to the Senate committee, the opportunity was with you, Mr. Swan, and he wasn't aware of any conversations you'd had with the Treasurer about that public commitment. So what conversations did you have with the Treasurer before you announced $500 million of members' money to go towards the Housing Australia Future Fund?
The conversations I had about the $500 million over 5 years to go to the Housing Australia Fund were had with our investment team here in Cbus, which is headed up by Linda Cunningham, who I mentioned earlier. All investments that Cbus makes are taken by our investment professionals, not taken by the board. They're not decided by the board.
You announced it.
I'll come to that in a second. The first point is very simple. Any commitment that we make for any investment, including housing, is made through the Chief Investment Officer under delegations from the board. And whether it's an investment in housing or whether it's a commercial investment in anything else, that's where the decisions are taken. So in the lead up to the housing roundtable that occurred at the end of that year, there were discussions in Cbus about whether we would make commitments under the emerging framework that the government was considering.
So all the Treasurer about it?
I don't think I discussed that with the Treasurer, the $500 million figure in the lead up, but there were discussions. There were discussions between Ms. Cunningham and other funds, and I also think government officials and maybe the Treasurer's office around that time about the framework that the government was considering.
So have you had discussions with the Treasurer about any Cbus matters?
I haven't had any discussions with the Treasurer in recent times about Cbus matters at all, actually. I'm very careful
in the past?
But I've certainly discussed superannuation with the Treasurer on multiple occasions over a long period of time because we regard it as one of the finest reforms of a structural nature implemented by a government in the history of the country. So I've discussed with the Treasurer and the government issues to do with superannuation and its success.
And what about the issues around the changes that Cbus sought to RG97, the regulatory guide dealing with member disclosures? There was a public interest immunity claim signed by Dr. Chalmers, the Treasurer, where he was required to consult with Cbus, and Dr. Chalmers and Cbus wanted that document to be covered up. So what discussions did you have about that?
I didn't have any discussions with Dr. Chalmers about that, but I certainly think some of Cbus officials may well have had a discussion about that very important issue which inhibits investment. And
Might get-
as would other funds have done so as well.
Might get you to take that on notice then. So I want to ask you about did Cbus have a 40th birthday celebration proposed?
We did.
Okay, and where was that to be held?
I think it was at it was held at the theatre here in the Regent Theatre here in Melbourne. Yeah.
Okay, and how much was the cost of that event?
I've taken that on notice, Senator.
Okay, and did the event go ahead as a birthday party for Cbus, or did it go ahead as a staff planning day or something similar?
Well, what it did achieve was a focus on our 40th anniversary and what it meant for the reform of the fund as we went forward. So from our point of view, it's a key strategic part of the uplift we were seeking to achieve and the changes we had put in place over a period of time under our new CEO, Mr. Fox.
Were there any discussions internally about whether that would meet the best financial interest test, spending members' money on hiring out a big theatre?
I'm certain it would have met the best financial interest test, Senator, because it was an integral part of developing the fund, celebrating its history and learning the lessons of what it means for the future of the fund.
Okay, but did you have a discussion about whether it would meet the best financial interest duty?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Okay.